Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Rabbi Yisroel Bernath. If you don't know me, I'd love to get to know you. You can very easily reach me. I'm reachable on Facebook, facebook.com/myrabbi, or by email, rabbi@jewishndg.com. I'm very easy to get a hold of. And I'm excited tonight to go through something completely new. Tonight's talk is called, Are You Realistic with Your Dating? Now, in this talk, there were so many different ways that I could have gone. So there, in no way will I be able to cover everything. But if I don't cover something that you're interested in, I want you to take the opportunity to write your questions in the chat box. And for the second hour of tonight's session, we are going to have a Q&A, an open, unrecorded Q&A, and we will answer all of your questions about relationships, whether it's about this topic or not. So that is what to look forward to tonight. Now, some of our relationships are based on unconditional love, or at least they should be. According to the Torah, Pirkei Avot, or Ethics of Our Fathers, but I assume if you don't know what Pirkei Avot is, you probably don't know what Ethics of Our Fathers is. It says that this love, this unconditional love, is called Ahava She'ena Tiluya B'Davar, which means it's a love which doesn't depend on anything. So there's your family, and each relationship is there in your family is different. Your relationship with your parents may be one of honor and respect. You may love and be a giver or receiver with your spouse. Raise your children, give them a good education. Try not to be a rival with your siblings. Then there's your extended family, the Jewish people, let's say, or the people of the world. The Torah wants us all to love each other unconditionally too. And that's the mitzvah of what is called Ahavat Yisroel. And that's probably the most difficult mitzvah in the good book. There's other types of unconditional love, but then there's another type of love that Pirkei Avot speaks about, and that's called conditional love. Ahava She'teluya B'Davar. So that could be, conditional love can be working relationships, your coworkers, your boss, your neighbors, even the government could be a conditional love. Now, you're not obligated to love any of these people, but you need to get along with them. The Torah calls this darchei shalom, the way of peace. So what do all these relationships have in common? What do they all need to improve? The one thing I could think of is they all have one very powerful idea in common, and that is conflict. Every single relationship has or could have some kind of conflict. So what do you think of when I say the word conflict? Does it give you a good feeling? Does it give you bad feelings? Does conflict make you uncomfortable? Do you embrace conflict? The first thing that I want to say here tonight is so contrary to maybe everything that you've been conditioned to know. And that is that conflict is good. I know that we're not trained to think like this in North America, but conflict is good. Judaism teaches us that conflict is how we learn. Conflict is how we grow. Conflict is collective thinking. It just depends most of the time on how we manage it. You know, it's interesting. If you think about a movie, let's say, a movie has three parts. It has the setup, the conflict, and then the resolution. Would you watch a film that didn't have a conflict? You know, there are two Talmuds in Jewish tradition. There's the Jerusalem Talmud and there's the Babylonian Talmud. Today, most of our studies, though some people do study the Jerusalem Talmud, most people study the Babylonian Talmud. Why? Because there's more conflict in it. Everyone's always disagreeing. The Jerusalem Talmud is just too serene. So ask us this question. Why is conflict so healthy in a relationship? Conflict is so healthy because it's human nature. Every strength that a person has also contains a weakness, and vice versa. Every weakness contains a strength. I'm going to say that again. Every strength in human nature also contains a weakness. If you are good at something, you're also going to be weak at something else. That is just the way it is. Part of life is becoming balanced. So you can't be good at everything. So every strength that we have also contains within it a weakness. For example, someone who is really neat, someone who is really organized, someone who's really on time, all those are considered to be good traits, but they also imply a weakness because that person is not able to be flexible. They can't just let loose and have fun. And some people want that in a spouse. They want someone who could just be spontaneous and let loose. That person who is always organized and always on time, you may not want to go on vacation with them. I mean, maybe if you want to see the Grand Canyon, Mount Rushmore, and a Broadway show all on the same day with minute-by-minute precision, maybe you'll go with them. Sounds relaxing, right? So the interesting thing for our super organized hypothetical person is what happens when he or she has to deal with someone who's different. What happens when they have to deal with someone who's different at home or at work or at school? They get frustrated. The first thing to understand is that you need them and they need you. They need to teach you, who may be a little more spontaneous, how to be organized. And you need to teach them how to be more flexible. Different situations are going to require different things. So in life, someone who may be a little disorganized and spontaneous may want someone who's more organized. Someone who is very flexible may want to find someone who's not as flexible. Because what that is balancing. That's complementary. And that's important. Now, what happens when your boss or your teacher, your professor, leaves something up in the air? Are you going to freak out because you couldn't deal with it in advance? Are you going to be able to wing it? Because sometimes we just got to wing it. Look at what's going on in our world today. We just got to wing it sometimes. Now, people are complicated. We're all so complicated. There are so many different kinds of conflicts. And we all think, my gosh, my conflicts, they're unique. Nobody else has this particular conflict in their life. I have a secret to tell you. We're not necessarily so different. Actually, there are 5 issues that people in every type of relationship tend to get into long-term conflicts about. So before I introduce these, what is called the Big 5, I'll tell you where it came from. It all began in 1919. There was a young American psychologist. His name was Gordon Allport. And he pays a visit, none other, to the great Sigmund Freud. And when he meets him, Allport is telling Freud about his journey. And he says something fascinating. On the train, there was this little boy who was obsessing. And he kept on wiping the seat down. He didn't want to stay next to anyone. He didn't want to touch anything. And Allport wondered if the boy's mother had some kind of a dirt phobia that had rubbed off on him. So he listens, Freud listens to Allport's story, and he says, yeah. He looks at him and he says, that wasn't the little boy on the train. That was you as a little boy. And basically, like, there was no one on the train, and this was some kind of unconscious episode from your repressed childhood. Now, Alport thought at this moment that Freud was digging a little too deep. And sometimes you just need to look at the behavior that describes the personality in terms of fundamental traits or characteristics, or what he calls conscious motives. And he wasn't as much interested in explaining the traits as he was describing them in modern trait researchers. Their names were Robert McRae and Paul Costa. And what they did is they took Alport's ideas and they organized them into what today is known as the Big 5 personality traits. You can Google them. They're very well known. And I'm going to talk a little bit about them tonight because I think that they're so important when you're trying to figure out if you're realistic in your dating, if you're realistic in your relationships. They are so important to know. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen. And I have just a little page that I'll have just for you to be able to look. And these are the Big 5 couple differences. Now, I didn't make this up. This is the work of Alport. I don't like, and you can see clearly that one of them looks more favorable and the other one looks more not so favorable. So if I was doing it, I would do it very differently, but we have to work with the science that we have. And I'll explain each of these. So there's extroversion versus introversion. There's agreeableness versus antagonism. There's conscientiousness versus lack of direction. There's neuroticism versus stability, and openness to experience versus closed to experience. Now, I actually have a 2-page questionnaire that you can take. Ideally, you want to take it with someone that you're dating or in a relationship with, and you can actually see where you fit on the spectrum of this, which is fascinating. So basically, there's 0 to 40, 0 being on the left side, and 40 being on the right side. And everyone is going to be somewhere in the middle, which means I very rarely found someone who's a 0 or a 40. You may be, let's just go to extrovert versus introvert just for a second. So you may be, I don't know, a 24 an extrovert, which means you're more extrovert than you are introvert, but you're not really extrovert because you're only 24 of 40. So let's say 0 is introvert, 40 is extrovert, 20 is the balance of the two. If you're a 20, you're a balance between an extrovert and an introvert. And you're a 24, which means you're more leaning towards the extrovert side, but you also have an introvert side. What I like about this is that there's a lot of gray area in it. It's not black and white. So we all are going to find ourselves somewhere in the middle, which I think is fantastic because I definitely consider myself an extrovert, but I wouldn't consider myself a 40 extrovert. Maybe I'm a 30 extrovert. So it kind of allows us to see ourselves as fluid and not as stagnant. So this is called, it's either called canoe or ocean. There's an acronym for these 5. I figured it's summer, so they both work, canoe and ocean. Kind of where a lot of us want to be right now. So let's get started with the first one. And they're not all in order. So I'm going to kind of move around the page a bit. So the first one I'm going to talk about tonight is conscientiousness versus lack of direction. Conscientiousness means someone who is organized. If you are 40 conscientious, you're organized, you're on time, you are self-disciplined. If you're a 0, there you have lack of direction. You know, kind of like someone saying, boy, he's got lack of direction, you know? So someone who has lack of direction, again, I don't like it because it's important, because that person who has lack of direction, like the person who's conscientious is the person who's always honest and hardworking, and you know, they prefer to have clean homes. And people who are, let's say, lack of direction, maybe they cheat and they're messy. So that is conscientiousness versus lack of direction. Now let's look at agreeableness versus antagonism. Someone who's agreeable is someone who always agrees. They're diplomatic, they're polite. No matter what, they're always agreeing. They're getting along with people to the detriment of everything else, because for them, agreeing with everyone is the most important thing. Can you relate to this? So the opposite of agreeableness is disagreeableness, antagonism, or disagreeableness would also be a word that you would use for it. Someone who always disagrees, someone who always says no, someone who's blunt, moody, maybe they're a curmudgeon. So agreeableness is going to reflect how much individuals adjust their behavior to suit others. And high scorers that are people are going to get closer to 40 are typically polite and they like people, and low scorers are typically people who say it like it is. Now, you would say that you want to be agreeable because the world says you should be agreeable, not antagonistic. But the truth is that if you always say yes, if you're a yes man and you always say yes and you never say no, then you never really said yes. You have to say no in order to say yes, which means the moment you say no, the moment you have a little bit of antagonism, all your agreeableness works. More on that in a moment. Then we have neuroticism versus stability. I don't like this. You know, these researchers are bad. They went after our moms. These poor Jewish mothers, neuroticism. Come on. So neuroticism is basically how emotional somebody is. As in emotionally unstable, it could be anxiety, it could be anger, it could be depression, it could be impulsiveness, thin skin, it could be a lack of self-confidence. And the opposite of that is emotional stability, which means someone who is, you know, who is not neurotic is what we call the stable person. And it's interesting is you're going to find someone who's more on the neurotic side is going to need someone more on the stable side. By the way, in case you haven't noticed this yet, I am giving you one of the great secrets of matchmaking. Because if matchmakers used a system like this to be able to make their matches, they would be much more accurate. Because what we have here in the Big Five is a complete couple, which means I'm not saying that you always need two people, you know, one who's conscientious and one who has lack of direction, but it's a good idea to have people that are somewhere, you know, one more on the conscientious side and one more on the lack of direction side. That's going to make a wholeness. And it's a good idea for the person who's neurotic to have someone who's a little more stable. And you're going to find that naturally people who are more emotional are going to be attracted to people who are more stable, calm, cool, and collected. So it's just, we're talking about nature here. We're not saying that it's good or bad. We're talking about you and who you are, who we are, who each of us is. The next one, number 4, is we have openness to experience. Now, openness to experience versus closed to experience is something that I think has become really important today, because there's all these people who say, oh, I want to travel. So it describes someone who is intellectually curious, who's really into aesthetics. Maybe they like to read fantasy or they like to read sci-fi. They have a wide interest of hobbies or ideas. They like to try new things. They want to explore the world. They want to try different foods. Now, the opposite of that is someone who's close to experience. Someone who's close to experience is that kind of person who wants to go to the same restaurant at the same time every single week and order the same thing. And they've been doing that for the past 15 years. Now, there's a value in both of those. There's a value in the person who is making sure that the world has a routine and the person who's the free spirit. So the openness to experience is the person who's seeking a new experience, who's seeking something new. And the opposite, the close to experience, is someone who's very down to earth, very methodical. And finally, we'll go back to the top, extrovert versus introvert. Now, what's fascinating about extrovert and introvert, you do sometimes have couples where they're both introverts or they're both extroverts. The world has kind of forced us to be somewhat of an extrovert. What is an extrovert? An extrovert is someone who, when they want to relax, they want to hang out with people. An introvert is someone, when they want to relax, they want to read a book and they want to hide from people. it's a really good idea. Like I said, nothing is set in stone, but it's a good idea that a couple have both an extrovert and an introvert. Because if they're both introverts, they're never going to get out of the house. They'll never get out of the house. And if they're both extroverts, they'll never be in the house. So it's nice in a couplehood to have that balance between extroversion and introversion, right? So extrovert is the personality trait that seeks fulfillment from sources outside of the self, from hanging out with people, something, or community. An introvert is someone who prefers to be alone, which means they get their vitality, they get their energy, they get their excitement from doing things alone. Now, I'm not going to read everyone's mind, but I'm sure as I'm talking, you're pegging yourself into one of these 5 personality factors. And you decided what you are, you decided where you fit in, and as I'm describing it, you're already trying to figure out, where you fit into the whole scheme of the big 5 couple differences. Now, what's amazing is, I don't know if I can try this, but can all the disagreeable people please raise their hand? Come on, don't be shy. Okay, no one's going to do it. That's fine. It's hard to be honest about this, because everyone who's ever been in a relationship with a disagreeable person will know that if they're disagreeable, they're probably not going to raise their hand if you ask them to. If you say, don't raise your hand, then maybe they'll do it. So what I'm trying to point out is that the words that the scientists have chosen to describe these 5 factors are really quite judgmental. And they make us naturally favor one side over the other. I'm going to stop the share. I will send this to you in your handouts later, so you'll have it. And what they do is they actually make us favor one side over the other. Like, who wants to be labeled as disagreeable or antagonistic? But what's fascinating, if you look at Judaism, if you look at Kabbalah, for example, we have our own terms. We refer to these personality factors as sefirot or midot. And so you forget about disagreeable or antagonism. You have someone, let's say, who may identify as a chesed person, which means loving kindness. And the opposite of loving kindness is gevura. What is gevura? Gevura is not, as people say, severity. It's actually the stop. It's where loving kindness stops. So the first time you say no, if you're kind, it could have no end. But the moment you say no once, all of your kindness worked. So that's what, so there's 2 opposite sides here. There is loving kindness on one side, actually on the right side. I don't know if I'm on my right or your right. Sorry. You have loving kindness on one side, and then you have severity or gevura on the other side. And what it is loving kindness is loving kindness. It's shooting forth. It's exciting. It's giving. And people who are givers, they give and give. But actually, the Torah says you can only give a certain amount to others, to the less fortunate, up to 20%. Why? Because the Torah doesn't want us to become needy people as well. So the opposite of giving is stop. I'm not giving. And that is chesed and gevura in the midot. Now, these Jewish terms, they're ancient, and they convey a lot. For example, agreeableness in the big 5 is going to refer to a chesed, a loving kindness type person, a person who always sees the good in others. And gevura, the severity in the midot, is going to refer to someone who holds back more, someone who's more judging of who they associate themselves with. And think about that. In a couplehood, you need both of those. That's really good. Someone who's saying, let's do everything, and someone who's saying, whoa. Not everything. We need to save something for ourselves. And that isn't always a bad thing. So we have to learn to recognize that when someone is different than us in terms of these 5 factors or these midot, and to appreciate that they actually may have something to teach us. So a kind person needs to learn to say no, because if you always agree, then you never really agree. It's not being your own person. They say that someone who's open to experience is a very good leader. Great leaders are people who are open to new experiences. They say that it's a very good trait to have. But let me tell you, if we were all scored high to open to experiences, the world would be a crazy place. We need some people who are closed to experiences. We need some people who are going to keep our retail stores in business because they are people who are need their particular thing at a particular time, and they like the order. Openness to experience is what we call chachma. Chachma doesn't mean wisdom in this sense. It actually means intellectual conception, a certain kind of ability to create new ideas and to bring things back to Pirkei Avot, to ethics of our fathers. It says, Im ein chachma, ein bina. Im ein bina, ein chachma. That chachma needs bina. So a person who is closed to new experiences, which is bina, the processor, and the one who is open to new experiences is chachma. So the person who's open to new experiences needs the person who's closed to new experiences to be able to process all the new experiences. Because probably the person who's close to new experiences is the one who's going to bring along the camera. The one who's open to new experience could care less about the pictures. But then they have nothing to show for it in 5 years. You say, oh, that was a great trip that we went on, but do we have any pictures? Yes. I brought my camera along and I took pictures. So they both need each other. Openness to experience actually has a bit of a correlation with being politically liberal, and close to experience has a bit of a correlation with being politically conservative. I'm not getting into politics, but somehow everyone's talking about the political climate, that is so polarized, especially in the South. So you want to know why? It's because we've stopped seeing each other as people. We've stopped trying to understand why our opponents are the way they are and to see the good in what they're saying. People to be apolitical, to say that I don't go on either side. I don't get involved in. You know, I don't want to talk to people who are on the other side of the aisle as I am. But they're not. They're just like you, but a little different. And the funny thing is that we all want mostly the same things, but they just have a different approach of getting there. Maybe they're wrong. Maybe you're wrong. Maybe they're right. Maybe you're right. But at least it's important that we see each other as an individual. And we're talking about how much we appreciate what the other person is saying and how it's coming from a good place before we start disagreeing with them. Realizing that God gave each of you two different personalities and the result in two different perspectives. And that's for a reason. And I think going back to the big five, that the science is trying to promote a certain kind of ideal person, a person who scores really high is considered a success. We would say there's someone who's agreeable, who's extroverted, who's emotionally stable, who's open to experience, who's conscientious, and they're probably going to be rich and successful. I don't know. Maybe they will, and maybe they won't. But the point is the world needs everybody, and not everyone is going to be that kind of person. We need a good police officer today, right? We need a baker, and we need people to be good husbands and wives. Somehow we've lost the joy of good husbands and wives. I don't know what happened. I wasn't around, but sometime in the 60s, we got everything we wanted besides good relationships. Good relationships took a tremendous toll. And as a result of that, we have to go back to the drawing board and we have to re-ask ourselves, what is it going to take to have a good relationship in the 21st century? We need those neurotic people. Neuroticism is such a stigma, but they're emotive, they're midot people, they're more sensitive. They're understanding. And you know what? Some people who are more intellectual like a little drama. They look for drama. So someone who has a boring emotional life, they have that very flat affect. They're probably going to marry someone who's more emotional than them because they want a little drama. They want that neurotic. They want to keep things exciting because they're open to experience and they need new challenges. So without neurotic people, we wouldn't have people like Woody Allen. So seriously, there's so much art, there's so much comedy, there's so much music, there's so much literature that would be missing from the world without neurotic people, without introverts, or we call them antisocial. We'd probably be stuck in the Stone Age. I mean, there would be so much science and technology missing from our world without those introverts. We all need each other. And what we need to do, what I wanted to bring out in the first half of my talk here, is I wanted to bring out that we each need to find our unique roles. And it doesn't mean that it's a good or bad, but it's so important to know where your unique role is. And I'm going to send you a self-assessment that you can do tonight to find out where you fit into the Big Five. And once you do that, I think that you're going to look at the way you date very differently. You're going to realize that maybe the person that you're looking for is not exactly the person you've been looking for. Maybe you think you want something. I see it so often that there's a disconnect between the heart and the mind. Intellectually, we know we want a certain thing, but we're attracted emotionally to something else. And that's hard. That's hard. It's so important for us to intellectually know what we want and then to emotionally be attracted to the person that we know is so important for us. And not to have that disconnect. To make sure to be on the same page, both intellectually and emotionally. Now, for those of you who got your handout, I'm going to go into the handout now for the second half of tonight's talk. Last week, we left off talking about infatuation. For those of you who didn't have an opportunity to take part in that class, I will send it in tonight's follow-up package. When you're infatuated, you end up convincing yourself that the object of your infatuation is perfect. And there are basically three reasons that you're going to find that you're completely unrealistic about the object of your infatuation. Now, we already decided that when you're dating, most relationships are going to begin with a certain level of infatuation. That's just the reality. We need that infatuation. It's not a bad thing. As long as we know what to do with it, it's not a bad thing. We need that infatuation. But there are three things or three reasons why you may be unrealistic about the person you're dating when or during the time that you're infatuated with them. Number one, you just met the person and you don't know their faults. So you end up, there's two things that people do. They either, before they meet them, they figure out for 3 days why it's not going to work, and then they become self-fulfilling prophets because they get to the date and it doesn't work because they said it wouldn't work. Of course it's not going to work because you said it's not going to work. Or the opposite, you infatuate over the person and you don't even know any of their faults. You just create this image. Oh, it's the perfect person. It's the greatest person. It's so wonderful. So you don't know anything about them or you know very little about them, yet you infatuate over them. Number two, you know their faults, but you ignore them. You're in denial of them. You don't want to see the faults because it might end your infatuation, which means you're excited about being infatuated and you don't want to end a good thing. By the way, there's people who stay in this state for years in a relationship. It can't last longer than 3 years, maybe 4 years if you're lucky, infatuation, according to the studies. And number three, you admit his or her faults, but the infatuation is so strong that you brush them aside. It's similar to a patient after surgery, and they're put on morphine. And they know that there's pain, but they can't feel it. They can't access it. So they don't have to deal with it because they can't access the pain. So the same thing with infatuation. When you're infatuated, you know that the flaw is there, but you're so hooked on the infatuation that nothing seems to matter. And in fact, you still see or you view the object of your infatuation as perfect. The funny thing is that this idea of viewing the object of your infatuation as perfect and being on like this morphine, it's actually not just an analogy. It's actually quite realistic, because studies have shown that a person experiencing infatuation emits a substance called PEA. And it's released in their system. PEA has the potential to bring on feelings of elation, of bliss, and euphoria. So actually, the substance PEA is released in the brain during infatuation, which is a natural amphetamine. And therefore, I think that would explain why people need so little sleep when they're infatuated. Because a person who's infatuated is literally intoxicated. And it's a good feeling. It's a high. It's excited. Especially if you've been down or you haven't been in a relationship in a while. It gets exciting. It's wonderful. It's amazing. But also you have to know what it is. By the way, that research comes from Helen Fisher. Dr. Helen Fisher. So somebody I met was once dating someone who had a tendency of being verbally abusive. She wasn't nasty all the time, but sometimes she would slip. And she actually did so once in front of me. And I told this young man what I had seen. And he actually later admitted to me that he saw the pattern. But he reassured me that he could handle it. I suggested, since they were engaged, that they get premarital counseling. I myself, as a rabbi, I will not marry a couple unless they go either through my premarital counseling or another premarital counseling. I think that every couple needs a toolbox in the beginning of their relationship. No matter how great their relationship is, if you want your relationship to last, you need a toolbox. And I believe that it is a rabbi's responsibility, or the person who is going to make the blessing under the chuppah, who's going to bless that union at that ceremony, at their wedding. It's their responsibility to set up that couple for a long-lasting and healthy relationship. So each couple needs a toolbox, just something that they can go to when things get tough, to know how to fight, to know how to manage their finances, to know how to deal with various dilemmas that come up, because the first year of marriage is tough. And if you have a couple tools, it really helps. And so he asked her to go for premarital counseling, and she was completely opposed. And so he obviously is completely infatuated with her, so he brushes aside her verbal abuse, and he decides it's not an issue. I mean, basically, in my opinion, he's too intoxicated with his infatuation to internalize the seriousness of her behavior. And after they're married, unfortunately, she continued with her abusive pattern, she continued with her abusive words, and eventually they divorced. Now, had he sobered up earlier, the mistake could have been avoided. But sometimes the person inebriated with infatuation asks the following question: isn't love all about accepting and loving a person with their flaws, in spite of their flaws? I mean, that's what I'm doing. I'm loving the person. I'm being realistic. I'm loving the person, flaws and all. Now, this is a really tricky question. And in order to find the answer, we have to remember that infatuation is effortless, while love requires some effort. And the difference between how infatuation deals with flaws versus how love deals with flaws is that infatuation effortlessly ignores or plays down someone's faults. Love consciously accepts those faults with effort, but chooses to focus on the positive. So if you are conscious about those faults, but you choose to focus on the positive, it could be that you're active, and that active is not infatuation, it's actually love. And it's very fine. That's why you really need, I always say that you need someone who's going to be able to guide you, a mentor, therapist, somebody who's going to be able to guide you to be able to really know the fine line between infatuation and love. But I'll try to explain it. So infatuation effortlessly ignores or it plays down someone's faults. And love consciously accepts those faults with effort, but chooses to focus on the positive with effort. So what happens to a truly loving relationship? How does that differentiate from an infatuated one? In a loving relationship, which means one with serious marriage potential. Now, obviously, there's going to be myriads of variants on this. We have to generalize. There's more than one of us here. So the moment you have more than one person in the room, we have no choice but to generalize. So obviously, I'm generalizing here. So two people meet. They like each other. They share goals and values. There's attraction. They spend time getting to know each other, going beyond the image. As they talk and as they spend time together, some of their thoughts, some of their faults become more apparent. Now, they don't ignore those faults. They don't deny those faults. Rather, they responsibly consider whether they're able to handle them. In other words, they're able to assess the authenticity of a real relationship as they progress. They build the foundation of their marriage on shared values, on honesty, on respect, on knowledge, and of course, on attraction. Not attraction first, attraction last, but attraction is important. Instead of building their relationship on wishful thinking, on blind attraction, on a false sense of security, the relationship is built on an assessment and an understanding and a mature acceptance of their spouses or the person they're dating's imperfections, not a denial of them. So let's take a look at love, for example. There's a couple who I know who's been married for, years. But already during dating, there was this one big issue. She saw it right away. The guy was always late. He wasn't the conscientious type. And so she had to make a decision. Could she marry him? She was the conscientious type. She wanted everything to be on time. As you can see, I like things to be on time. I started on time tonight. I always start on time. At least I try to. And there were a lot of things that were very right about the relationship. But with her eyes open, she decided, by weighing the pros and the cons of the relationship, that she could handle it. And that not only could she handle it, but maybe it's actually good for her. And anyone happily married, including this couple, will admit that these imperfections become more annoying at times. They don't go away. But because of the strong foundation of their relationship, the foundation meaning a relationship based on reality, his faults become less significant to her over time. And he even began to change and improve as a result of the marriage because he wanted to make her happy. Now, you don't ever get into the relationship and say, oh, well, he'll change eventually. You'll see. I'm good at that. I know how to change guys. That's not a good idea. You're going to get what you're going to get today. You can't marry someone or be in a serious relationship with someone for their potential. You have to be in the relationship for the person they are today. A few weeks ago, I met this woman via Skype. We had a Skype meeting. She's divorced with a few kids. And when I asked her why she was divorced, she said, because my ex-husband was abusive. Now, of course, my next question is, you didn't know that he had abusive tendencies before you married him? And she answers, of course I knew. We dated for almost 2 years before we got married. So my next question is even more obvious. So why did you marry him? You know what her answer is? I thought that I could handle it. And I thought that he would change after marriage. That, my friends, is a bad idea. You marry someone for who they are today, not for the person they're going to become. When we marry people whose faults are so damaging that the relationship can't survive unless the person changes, the person will probably never change. Because we didn't marry them. We married the version of them that we wanted them to be. And when we can honestly handle someone's faults, and when we marry the person as they are without it being fully conditional on them changing, that's when people will, in fact, change for the better. Because they're honest and they're fully accepted as is, and they know that you're not marrying them with an idea of a potential of who they are. You're marrying them knowing good and well who they are, and they'll probably change in that situation. So, are you realistic about yourself? Sometimes people are realistic about the other person, but they're not realistic about themselves. For anyone who didn't take my 5-step process to knowing if you're realistic about the person with yourself and the person you're dating, please let me know and I'll send that to you. I sent that to a bunch of you last week. It's not uncommon for someone to come to me with a list a mile long with what they want in a future spouse. No one has all those qualities. No one is going to have every single quality that you're looking for. There are some people who are looking for someone who doesn't exist. And some other people are underestimating themselves. They could actually do better. So people who are unable to see clearly, they generally fall into 3 traps. Number 1, infatuation. Infatuation basically it's predicated on a lie. The lie is, all I need is attraction, and I'll be fine. That's a lie. All you need is attraction for a minute. If you want to be in a relationship that's a minute, then you can be in an infatuated relationship. If you want to be in a relationship that's longer than a minute, okay, you know what? I'll give you more than a minute. I'll give you 2 hours. You know why? That's how long a movie is. If you want a relationship that has a beginning, a middle, and an end, in 2 hours, go for all I need is attraction. Then there's number 2. Sometimes I get these calls from these people, and you hear a certain sense in their voice. I have to get married now. No, I have to. Desperation. And I say to them, how far are you away from your 30th birthday? For some reason, there's some correlation between desperation and a 30th birthday, or somewhere around there. I don't know. The lie is there's no one else out there for me. I'm desperate for this person. The trap of desperation is a very dangerous one. It's caused people to ignore horrific things during the dating process. And number 3, the third trap is not in reality. The person who says, I'm perfect, so I think that I deserve someone who's perfect too. And you know nobody's perfect. But I'm perfect. I'm the one. I'm the exception. And I'm going to find somebody who's perfect. This trap will keep a person single forever. Okay, I don't know forever, but for a long, long time. Now, in order to avoid these 3 traps, the 3 traps of infatuation, desperation, and not being in reality, I would encourage you to do the following. I would encourage you to create a detailed list of the character traits you're looking for. There's a lot of different ways of going about doing this. Some people say you should do, the goal is to get to 3 things you can't live with and 3 things you can't live without. What I would recommend is I have a 6-step process that I can send you if you haven't done it yet. And the secret behind it is you don't know what step 2 is before you finish step 1. You must Finish step 1 completely before you go on to step 2, and then step 2 before 3, and so on and so on. And I know people have this tendency to look ahead, but it doesn't work if you know what's going to happen next. So I'm gonna leave it at that. And this is a very easy way to have a list, to have a realistic list. At the end of this, you end up with a list. Now I'll tell you what you'll do with that list, because anyway, I'll leave it for that. I'll leave you in wondering what to do with the list. If for those of you who have done it, maybe you can ask me later. I'll tell you what to do with the list. So this guy, let's call him Hal. He consults me regarding this woman he's dating. And she really liked him. And he also really liked her, but wasn't sure that he was, quote unquote, attracted enough to her. And Hal had already been dropped quite a few times. And he was aware that he wasn't, I don't know, all that, whatever that means. I don't really get the whole attraction thing, the whole dating game. We can talk about it at a different time. And as a result, he's determined to give this woman a fair chance. And I told him a story that I had heard the very same day, that a couple was dating and they liked each other very much. And one thing holding him back from marrying her was that she had a very big nose. And he found her nose unattractive. And he was open with her about this. And she actually said that she didn't mind getting her nose fixed, which I don't think is a good idea, but this is what happened. And it was something that she had always considered doing, is what she said. Maybe true, maybe not true. They get engaged, but there's so much to do before the wedding that she didn't have time to get her nose fixed. After the wedding, they're very busy, and then she's expecting, and before they knew it, they're married a few years, they've got a couple of kids. And one day she says, you know what? I'm not pregnant. It's time for me to have the nose operation. And he hears her calling her doctor to make the appointment. And she gets off the phone and he says, what are you doing? Why are you going for a nose operation? She says, what do you mean? Don't you remember? Is that you're going to let someone touch that beautiful nose of yours? Please don't. When I finished telling this guy, Hal, we'll call him, the story, he starts laughing. And a couple of weeks later, he calls me and he tells me he's still dating the same woman. And he said that, you don't know what I was thinking when I said that she wasn't very attractive. She's beautiful. I can't believe I didn't see it. I had this unrealistic version of what I thought attractiveness was. And that's a problem. So many of us have these immature, unrealistic versions of attractiveness that we get from the movies. Again, you want to listen to the movies? You'll get a 2-hour relationship out of it. A beginning, middle, and a really nasty end, usually. And what ends up happening, they end up getting engaged and married, and they go on to have a very happy relationship. So what I want you to do is I want you to think about tonight, what is realistic and what is not realistic. I think I went through the big 5 to help you. The list. We're going through infatuation. And on July 8th, I'm going to do the 3rd part to the series. They're all independent. You don't have to attend one to be able to get, but those of you who attend all of them will get the most out of it. And I'm going to address 5 questions that are they'll continue. If the reason why I'm doing it in 2 weeks is I want you to have some internal dialogue going on by then. Have done the process of what you're looking for, have maybe done the big 5 personality test. And then I'm going to answer 5 questions. And that is, can I admit the faults of the person I'm dating? Can I handle them? Can I admit my own faults? Am I aware of my own imperfections? Am I being realistic as to the type of man or woman I should marry? And number 5, am I allowing my fantasies, my immature needs to take over and push me and ignore negative or destructive aspects of the person I'm dating? And that's what we're going to do in the next part. So this is the end of our organized, or the first part of our talk tonight. I'm going to turn off the recording. And then we're going to go for an hour of questions and answers.